This will be a pretty short exercise. We're going to be adding a tile ceiling to this room. Later on I do want to add some furniture, so I don't want to make the floor too busy. You could make it a tile floor as well, or a tile wall. It works just the same way for any surface in one point that you're going to be applying the tiles to. So you can choose whether you want to apply it to a wall if you want to, but I'm going to put my tiles on the ceiling. So since this wall is not moving away from us in space, it's fine to just take literal measurements off your ruler here. You don't need to worry about using the X for this first step, but we will need to use the X when we start to extend the tiles out into the ceiling. So the first step is just to find an easily divisible distance, and you can make 10 tiles wide, you can make 15, it doesn't really matter. I would just use your centimeters or your inches, and the key is to make sure that the divisions are even, though. You don't want to have 4.5 gaps, this happens to be 5 inches, so I'm just going to make each division 1 inch, and I'm going to have 5 divisions that extend outward. So the first step is finding a distance that evenly fits into this back wall, and then the next step is to extend through this point outward using the central vanishing point, and extend those lines all the way off the top of your drawing. So starting at the point where the ceiling meets the back wall, just draw those lines outward until it goes off the page. And be as precise as you can when you're lining up your ruler so that these divisions stay nice and even. If one is narrower than the other, you'll find some mistakes in your finished drawing. Now this is really similar to what we did when we were drawing the steps. It's just that we're working on a different surface, but it's the exact same process. So we've divided the width into 5 evenly divided segments. And then the next step is to use a diagonal to bring that into the room. So what's happening here, though, we don't know where the corner of that ceiling is on this side. So what we'll do is we'll just find the point where the ceiling, this is maybe a little closer to the corner. This one might cause a little bit more distortion if we're not careful. So I'm just going to find a point. Let's just find the point where the tiles, we're going to trim the drawing down a little bit so that we have it meet at a nice even spot. And I'm just going to pretend that last quarter inch of the drawing isn't really a part that we're worried about. And then I'm going to go from this corner of the ceiling to the one that I just created, and we're going to be using a diagonal. So again, the diagonal always works to divide columns and rows into the same number of divisions. So we should get a 5 by 5 pattern on the ceiling here, if we do this right. So this is not leading to a vanishing point. This is just a measuring line. It's anytime you're using an X or a diagonal to subdivide a plane, you're allowed to do that in perspective. It's one of the few exceptions. So again, this is just a measuring guideline to help us find the points to put in the horizontal lines. Everywhere that this diagonal crosses one of those initial divisions, we're going to put a dot. And through each one of those dots, we're going to be adding a horizontal line in now. And that should give us the illusion of these tiles getting closer and closer together as they approach the vanishing point. So I'm going to try to keep these really level if I can. My triangle's not quite big enough to reach all the way across, but it can help me keep my ruler straighter. So that first line goes through this first dot, the second line will go through the second dot. Make sure you marked all your dots so you don't miss any of them, or you're going to have unevenly spaced tiles. you do it right, they should each be getting skinnier and skinnier as they get close to that back wall. Remember, you are not allowed to just measure along these planes that are foreshortened, that are moving away from us in space. All right, and if you want to make it look like checkerboard, you could just kind of quickly shade in. Hopefully you've got the same number of rows as you have columns, if you do this correctly. You might end up with a partial square at the very top of your page. Okay, not bad. So now what I want to try to do is we're going to bring in a pillar, and I want this pillar to rest on the ground plane but connect to the ceiling. So it's going to be a floor to ceiling post, like if we were in a parking garage, or if you were in some of these big cathedrals have these beautiful pillars, and even though they're not all connected to this, to a flat ceiling in the same point, you can project how tall to make the distant pillars based on how they track over to the wall in the ceiling. So we're gonna talk about doing that so that we've got a pillar placed out into the room. I think because we've already got a door on this side, I'm going to have you put the pillar over here, and we're going to keep it pretty far into the room. If it comes out too far, it might be that we're not able to track it to the wall. So we have to be able to trace a horizontal line to the wall, up the ceiling, and back across. So let's position it up here on the floor. So the first thing we need to do, in fact, what we probably could do, since we've already got the tile, this will save us a step. Let's pretend that the pillar is a rectangular pillar and it's connecting to the ceiling. Why don't you pick one of the diamond shapes that is, a couple squares away from the wall, and we're just going to outline that as the point where the pillar is touching the ceiling. If you didn't happen to have a tile drawn on your ceiling, you could still construct this diamond by using your vanishing point. So you would be drawing to the right and the left side of the pillar using vanishing lines here and here, and then you would just finish off that diamond shape by using 2 horizontals. So you don't necessarily have to do the tile floor step first, but this will just save us a little bit of time to just use one of these that we've already got figured out. So this will be the point where this blocky pillar connects to the ceiling. Then what we need to do is we need to extend it down into the room. So I'm going to draw a little circle at the 4 corners that I'm talking about. So from each one of these 4 spots, we're going to be extending a true vertical line down into the floor area. And we don't know yet. This is kind of like when we put the legs on the little treehouse form. We didn't know exactly where to end them yet, so just for now, draw some long vertical lines there. Do your best to try to keep them all parallel to one another, truly straight up and down. If it helps, you can use some of the lines that you've already drawn as reference lines for what is parallel. And now we need to track these edges to the wall and down and across the floor to figure out exactly where these need to end. You don't want to just guess and start to draw in the shape, or it won't seem believable. So I'm going to, first of all, find the front edge of my pillar. I'm going to track it across to the wall. So when it no longer is on the ceiling and it hits this plane change, this vanishing line, then we just track it straight down the wall. So this is not something that's going to show up in the final drawing, but I do want to see you include it for this exercise so that I know that you constructed it correctly. So again, do your best to try to keep that truly a vertical line. I'll even draw arrows in here so that there's no question about how we constructed this. So we came across this line. When we hit this corner, we changed direction, followed it all the way down to the point where we hit the floor, and then we come back across with another horizontal line to find the front of that pillar. So it is important that you're paying attention to whether you're drawing the front of the pillar or the back of the pillar. So we have to look back up at what's happening at the top here and track down which one of these lines is the front of the pillar. So if we find it up here, it's the two higher ones. They'll end up being the two lower ones here. The part of the pillar that's closest to us will be the larger rectangle. So we've got the front plane of the pillar here. And we need to do the same process to locate the back of the pillar. Or we can construct it using the information we have here. I think it works either way. So let me show you how to do that, but we'll double check it by tracking it on the wall again too. So from the front two corners of the pillar, the lower corners, we're going to go back to our central vanishing point. And we only need to go back as far as this point, but I will draw the dotted line anyway, just so you're sure that you're constructing yours the same way I did mine. And then from this dot, we also are going to go back to that same central vanishing point and stop. Again, this won't be visible, so I'm going to draw it as a dotted line. But we'll stop here where we meet this back edge of the pillar, and then these should be, if my, it doesn't look like I was perfectly square with something, they should line up if we had used a T-square. Mine's a little bit off, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find like a happy medium somewhere like a little below the one point and a little above the other, but I want to try to make it as square as I can. So to darken in the visible parts of this, we would be able to see this edge of the pillar really easily. That's the front edge of it. We'd be able to see this edge. If we want now, because I've ended up kind of covering up part of my doorway, I can lighten some of those marks. This back edge would actually become lighter too. So I'm gonna just try to imagine that we can still kind of see this construction, but it's faded out because it's behind a pillar. And none of these lines are part of the pillar, they're just extra. So we can erase those as well. I'm gonna even lighten up some of the stuff that's happening on the ceiling here. It's still fine to see a ghost image of it to know that you constructed it right, but we'll just lighten it a little bit so that the pillar reads a little bit more clearly. And I'll darken in that front edge one more time. Okay, so this part would be dotted, this part would be dotted. You want to imagine where the back of that pillar is. This is solid and this is dotted. I hope you can see that in the drawing now. So I want to make this pillar into a little bookshelf. This is going to be a little bit more challenging. So I think just to simplify things, I'm going to lighten these lines of the ceiling even a little bit more, but we do need to know where the back of that bookshelf ended up, so you might leave those in there. So we're going to be making this bookshelf feel like the shelves are facing us, and for this part I'm going to have you just use your ruler. You don't need to, since it's not a foreshortened plane, you don't need to worry about using the X to keep things in perspective, but I do want you to add some thickness to this. So go around the whole face of the bookshelf and make it look like it's built out of solid wood and not out of a thin piece of, paper thin. I'm trying to make this a pretty consistent thickness all the way around so that it feels like it's all made out of the same thickness of plywood. And even the top and bottom need some thickness. Make a nice sturdy bookshelf. Okay, so that's just our basic opening. we're going to add a couple of shelves. So I want you to have one shelf that is added above our horizon line. That we're going to be viewing from the underside. So it's sort of like we're looking up under the shelf a little bit there. And then you're going to add another shelf or two. You can add as many as you want, but I need at least one shelf below eye level, one shelf above eye level. The one that's below eye level, we're going to be able to see a little bit of the top surface of that shelf. So the eye level is really critical in how you finish off these shelves. Make the shelves truly horizontal. They don't need to be evenly spaced. You can if you want to measure it really precisely so that each shelf is the same height. But this is an adjustable bookshelf, so you can make the shelves as close together or as far apart as you want. The closer the shelves get to the eye level, the less of the depth of that shelf we'll be able to see. So if you happen to draw a shelf right on this horizon line, you would not be able to see. It would be sort of like seeing the shelf like right here. You wouldn't be able to see the top of it, you wouldn't be able to see the bottom of it. It would be right on your eye level. The minute it gets up higher, now we start to see the underside, and again, once it's below us, we can see a little bit of the top of the shelf, but it only is going to make sense if you can keep track of where that eye level is. I'm going to add one more shelf. So I'll have two shelves below eye level, one shelf above eye level. So at this point, the shelves don't have any depth at all. We're just seeing the face or the edge of the shelf, but we need to show the depth. We know how deep the bookshelf itself is because we have these really nice dotted lines that are going to tell us exactly where to stop as we're extending the shelves back. And we know that the back of the bookshelf, I'm going to trace it with my pencil here. This represents the back of the bookshelf. So the shelves cannot extend into space any deeper than those dotted guidelines. So I'll darken in this bottom area. We'd actually be able to see all of this now on that bottom shelf. And make sure this is still leading to your vanishing point, these lines that show the depth of the shelves. So this part would be solid. For the second shelf from the bottom, it's really important that we're looking at the corner that is, we wouldn't be able to see the bottom line necessarily unless these were glass shelves, but from this upper point of that shelf, we're going to extend back to the vanishing point, and the minute we cross this dotted line is where that shelf needs to stop. So keep track of where that dotted line is, and your shelf needs to stop right there. Okay? And then it's a matter of finishing the back of the shelf. We have the back of this shelf, but we don't have the back of this one yet. And because we're getting closer and closer to the eye level, we're seeing less and less of the depth of each of those shelves. So each one that gets a little bit higher, until we get to the eye level, they'll get flatter and flatter. So we see hardly any of that shelf. We now can darken in this part of the line because we know that that would be a visible part of the back of the bookshelf now. This shelf is almost at our eye level. We're going to just see a sliver of the top of that shelf. So we're still thinking about the top of the shelf and not the underside. So we're going to be drawing our vanishing line from the top of that double line. And it needs to be leading to our vanishing point. And I'm watching this dotted line that shows where the back of the bookshelf is. Wow, this is getting very flat. Yeah, I barely see any of that shelf. It's just the thinnest little sliver. So it's probably less than a millimeter of that shelf that we're seeing. It's probably too small to even be able to see well on the video. Now we're getting up to the point where we're starting at the top again. So because we have added a shelf here, or added some thickness, I'm going to go ahead and darken in, going straight from this corner back to that same point where we have this dotted line, and we'd also be able to see this line now as a solid because we can look up underneath the back of the bookshelf, and this line would be solid until we get to that first shelf, so we can make that dark again. Get rid of a few of these lines, make sure we can really see this nicely. Okay, now this shelf it's above our eye level. Here's our eye level, which means if this person were in that room, they would look up underneath that shelf. So now instead of drawing our vanishing lines from the top of that double line, we're looking at it from the bottom of the shelf. So we're going to be drawing a line from the bottom there. And taking it back to that same point where we had that vertical back of the bookshelf. And from this point where our vanishing line crosses our vertical line is where we add that last horizontal line. So draw it in as a solid line. Since you know how to draw small rectangular shapes in 1-point perspective, you could put some boxes on these shelves, or you could make some books on that shelf. They're all constructed the same way. You just think about a book as being a really flattened box. All right, so we have shelves. And you also know about drawing ellipses. So if you wanted to think about cylindrical form, realize that as those objects get closer and closer to our eye level, the ellipses get flatter and flatter, but all those things that you already know are going to help you make your interiors pretty cool looking. So that's just a super quick little cylinder. You can kind of lighten the backside, but I usually initially draw those ellipses just to kind of check my front ellipses for accuracy. And if there were a cylinder up on this shelf, because it's way above our eye level, remember you'd still think about those ellipses, even though this one, we couldn't see it on the shelf unless it were a glass shelf, you'd be thinking about it as, we'd be seeing the upper part of that ellipse. And if it were a glass shelf, we might be able to see a little bit here, but see, this one would be super flat because that plane is so close to our eye level that we wouldn't be able to see much. This would be a fairly flat ellipse too. Not nearly as round as that one or this one because it's closer to our eye level. So all these things are going to help you get better at drawing. There's our shelf, and we'll add some furniture on the next video.